Excited to talk about closed captioning today with probably the pioneers of it in the sports television industry and the entire television industry, at least here in the United States. On this edition of the SVG New Sponsor Spotlight, we are welcoming aboard the National Captioning Institute, NCI. Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Costa, Director of Digital at the Sports Video Group. Have the honor to be joined by Scott Pentoney. He's the Technical Operations Manager over at NCI. Scott, thanks so much for taking the time. Wonderful to have you all aboard. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, if you're a certain age, which I'll date myself, includes me, you'll remember the days of if people see your logos, they'll recognize it. They'll remember seeing it in the corner of their TVs back in the day, anytime something was captioned when you guys were really breaking out in the 80s and 90s. So tell us about National Captioning Institute, a brand that's been around for a long time. But what are you up to today?
Yeah, well, we are, let's start historically. We like to say that we are the pioneers, the original, the OG of closed captioning, if you will. Back in 1979, we worked with both the government and media industry to develop what is closed captioning today, develop a accessibility procedure and process to make television, primarily television at that point, accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing communities. And so that developed all the way to partnering to develop a microchip that is installed in televisions and to this day are installed in televisions, a decoder chip, and developing the whole closed captioning encoding process and getting receiving audio, sending caption data to those encoders that are then embed the caption data into the video streams that go out. So yeah, we've been around since day one, and we have seen a lot of changes over the last 40 plus years, and have evolved with those changes. And we are in the midst of one right now.
Sure, sure. Well, take us inside quickly, inside the product line, products, services, whether they're legacy or new. What are some of the highlights, especially as it pertains to maybe the live captioning of things?
Sure. And that's my area is real time
Mhm.
closed captioning, but we do offline captioning as well. We have quite an extensive business and services that are provided with the offline and pre-recorded content. But real time, we do real time captioning, a lot of local news, national news, sports programming, which we'll get into, all sorts of programming. A lot of the entertainment stuff is usually the pre-recorded
Mhm.
things that our offline department takes care of. But our real-time captioning, as well as translation in captioning and in dubbing as well.
Sure. So take us inside how maybe the captioning of live sporting events has evolved, maybe even over the past handful of years. When it was, a manual process, in the earlier days, I can't imagine how insanely difficult that can be for someone doing that. So how has the technology evolved and improved to make captioning something that can make live sports more accessible?
Yeah, well, even before we get into the technical aspect of
Mhm.
it, the biggest challenge in today, from the beginning from until today, the biggest challenge with sports captioning is the terminology and the pace and the knowledge of the sport and the players and all of those things that involve that particular sport. So having individuals, if we're using human captioners, highly skilled, highly trained captioners that are knowledgeable and skilled and fast paced and able to meet the demands of sports programming and live sports events. I come from an interesting background because when you talk about the changes and the evolution of live sports captioning, I was at ESPN for 23 years. And I did a lot of things in those 23 years. One of the proudest things that I was involved with and accomplishments was right there at the beginning when the captioning mandates from the FCC started to take effect. And so, if you remember back then, it was they started it off in phases, and you had to work your way up to 100%. So it wasn't just okay by this date you had to be 100% closed captioned across the board. You had to work your way up to 20%, 30%, 50%, and that required on the production side as a content creator in a production company or production house, whether it was inside of ESPN or outside production companies that was producing programming for us at ESPN, you now had to incorporate this closed captioning process and this procedure into your production process. And so sometimes that would be you produce your show like you always did, and then you got it closed captioned after the fact. And a lot of outside production companies would do that before they delivered the programming to us. So they had to speed up their or slide up their production schedule, get it done early enough to back then you didn't have, internet and ways to
Hmm.
digitally deliver content, FTP things back and forth and get it captioned. You had to physically mail tapes to the captioning company, get it done offline, and then they would mail those tapes and send those to ESPN for air. Within ESPN, when we would produce our own shows, if we did it live through a control room or short turnaround, taped ahead of time on tape delay type of thing, we had the option to actually get it done real time and have a real time captioner dial into the encoders and the listen lines and be able to caption it as we were producing the show. So we did them live. We did them, ahead of time if we were taping, if we were airing it on tape delay. And then we also would still do some offline things.
That's fascinating stuff. I mean, you don't, I feel like we don't say this too much anymore, but thank God for the internet, I guess, so that you don't have to do that anymore. But
Yes, yes,
silver
believe
lining, I
me.
guess. But
And I was very thankful because I was still around in handling those responsibilities at ESPN as those changes started to
mhm.
to come about. And when we got out of the shipping of tape, we used to have to box up cases and boxes of program tape and send it away to these captioning companies like NCI to have them caption content for us.
Mhm.
And when we no longer had to do that, it was fantastic. And then we even built facilities so that if it was a recorded program, we had the ability to just play it back through a room, whether it was a control room, an edit room, any type of production room that had an encoder. We installed an encoder and a listen line, and they were able to either live display if they had already captioned it live, then they could caption it again. We would play it back, not on the air, but off air, and they would caption it. We would record it and encode it with captions. So we got completely out of the, hey, shipping of tape. There was different ways to do it. And today there still are different ways to do it offline if necessary.
Sure, sure. Well, it's funny you talked about that timeline of how like captioning legally went from, over the air broadcast television to cable television. Then the internet brought about a whole bunch of digital video and now live streaming video, and that was a wild west for a while. But now you guys are doing some really interesting work, even with those direct-to-consumer streaming services. The Dallas Stars in the NHL launched Victory Plus this year. The Anaheim Ducks are on there as well, and you guys are helping them with that. What's that big project been like, and how is that a unique element now working with these directly streaming elements?
Yeah, this is an interesting situation and a really exciting and fun way for us to be able to help provide accessibility to different types of specifically sports programming. This is a company that is a new streaming, over the top, ad supported, free sports provider, streaming provider. They came to us. I think they heard of us through. We've done a lot of NHL programming. We have great history, lots of experience through NHL Network, MLB Network, TNT when NHL was on TNT, ESPN from when they had the rights and then lost it and then came back to ESPN. So we've got a ton of ESPN experience, and I think they were referred to us from our friends with the NHL and NHL programming. And what they're doing is they're streaming these non-national, regionalized productions of the Dallas Stars and Anaheim Ducks, both home and away games, but that are not available nationally, but linearly they're available. And it's their production. It's the linear production, regional production. They're making it available via streaming platform. And because it is airing on linear 100% closed captioned, and it's the same production, it is also required to be closed captioned on streaming. So you can't have it aired on one platform captioned and the other platform not captioned. So they needed some help, and they needed to get their stream captioned. And so we're helping them do those. And there's a couple different ways of how we're doing it, whether it's a home or away game, whether it's the Stars or it's the Ducks, because they're home games and the encoders physically located in the arenas, their individual home arenas. So there's ways that we've set up and worked with them to get this done. This is the first year that they're doing this. We're hoping that there'll be more NHL games added and more NHL teams, I should say, not games, but games of other
Mhm.
teams. So right now it's Ducks and Stars, as you said. and we'll see how it grows. But we started from the beginning of the season, including the preseason, and each of the airings have a pre and post game show as well.
Fascinating and more importantly, I guess, important stuff that you guys are doing, which is very, very cool. Before we let you go, Scott, uh, as someone who's worked in this industry for a while, as you look ahead to 2025, as it pertains to captioning specifically and the accessibility of live sports programming, is there a key trend or a key event or something in the industry that you're keeping an eye on as it pertains to this topic that maybe folks in the audience should be keeping an eye on as well?
Yeah, sure. Really, the hot topic in the closed captioning industry right now is ASR, automated speech recognition.
Sure.
Automated captions and not human captions, and the differences between the two. There's pros and cons to both sides. I don't want consumers or folks to think that automatically automated captions is better or worse, or humans is
Hmm.
better. Each has its own sort of pros and cons, and things that they do well and things that they may struggle with. And there's things that maybe one side can do better than the other side. So it's really dependent on, in our case, it's the providers and what their goals are for an end user. And there's different prices, obviously. It's cheaper for an automated computer to do the work than a human. But the end user will see slight differences, but it's really important to us that there is no degradation in quality or accuracy between the two. And we have finally got to that stage just over the last few years. And of course, with COVID, the demand was so intense and was so high that there was not enough humans on the planet to be able to meet the demand of all of the online, specifically online Zoom meetings like this, that people wanted captions. All of a sudden, there wasn't enough humans to do that work. So it helped propel the ASR process to come in and those procedures to come in. And so NCI has our own Caption Sentry service, is what we call it, Caption Sentry, and that's our automated captioning service that we offer. And it has really exploded over the last 2 years. So it really go back to the COVID demand, kind of pushing it. But for a good portion of years there, it had not reached the level of accuracy and quality. It did not meet our high standards and expectations. So
Sure.
it wasn't something that we were really selling or pushing that much and offering that much, because it wasn't there. It was like in the 60s, 70s, and then eventually got into the 80% accuracy. We are now at the high 90s, 96, 97, 98% accurate, even with the automated
Wow.
side of things. And so Caption Sentry, it's verbatim. So every sound that it hears, it's going to, if it's a word, if it's a language, it's going to attempt to caption it. And so it doesn't miss anything, where a human might actually paraphrase. It might drop some ums and ahs, those type of things. It will pick up, it's verbatim, every single
Hmm.
thing. So that's just one example of some of the differences between the two. Not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a different thing. But that is, we are at a evolution, a really historical, monumental time period in captioning, very similar to when we went from human steno writers to voice writers.
Mm.
Still humans, but instead of court stenographers steno writing on a steno machine, now we had people, we could train them faster, and they didn't require as many years training to be able to steno write. Now they could voice, but still a very highly skilled talent. It's unbelievable to listen to a conversation and repeat that conversation at the same time as you're continuing to listen. It's remarkable to watch somebody actually do it and work. But that was a big evolution and shift from steno writers to voice writers. Now we're in that same sort of a replication of shifting from voice writers to automated captioning. And so those of us that have been around, we're like, oh yeah, we've been through this
Yep.
before. This
Hmm.
sounds familiar. I think I've read this story before. It's just with different players.
Right, right. Well, it'll be fascinating to see how that continues to evolve and improve. And we here at SVG are really excited to have the National Captioning Institute as part of the organization now. He is Scott Pentoney. He's the technical operations over there, a manager over there at NCI. Scott, pleasure to speak with you. Hope to see you at SVG events down the line. And thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for having us. It's been a pleasure and it's an honor to speak with you guys.
All right. Well, you can learn more about the National Captioning Institute by visiting their website. They are at ncicap.org. And for more videos, including other introductions to some of the SVG sponsors in our SVG News Sponsor Spotlight, just visit our website at sportsvideo.org.